Good evening, everyone. How are you? I hope all is well at your end. You're all healthy and having a kind of good time in your lockdown with your family and friends, and having lots of Zoom calls as we're doing. I'm really happy to welcome you again at another episode of the Entrepreneur's Kitchen. This is episode number 18. Wow, it's unbelievable. I think we had a just slight streaming problem, so it's running again. Um, Tonight I am going to host an awesome entrepreneur, a very brilliant mind in the automotive industry. Stefan Beckers is a very dear friend. He is the chief engineer at the Ford passenger cars, and so we will experience about what a chief engineer at a passenger car division does at such a company like Ford. We will also experience a little bit about the innovation process, what he thinks about all of the future of mobility, what is the direction of it. And I'm really, really interested in his opinion today because the face of entire mobility sector, mobility industry is changing when we think about just the last couple of weeks already. So let's welcome Stefan Beckers. Hi, Stefan. How are you?
Hi, very good. Welcome, Sita. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. You know, you didn't have to travel, so
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
this
I'm
is
not using my car. Almost not in these days. That's a very interesting fact.
this is really convenient actually because you can invite everybody to every place, and most of them are like really at the just in time, so nobody's late.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I've seen that in the meetings we had. Most people attend in time and not like, oh, I'm having a coffee. Oh, I need to go to there. Oh, I'm late from this. No, they're all nicely coming in time these days. That's very, very pleasant.
Exactly. So are you actually still are you working right now, or is this lockdown just really keeping you out of work for now?
So I'm working from home. Just this week specifically was a global shutdown week for Ford globally. That's a decision that the company took.
Oh wow, okay.
So basically was on shutdown and forced vacation. But as of Tuesday, we are again working. Obviously, we're not producing any cars, but in my position where you're working on future products, work still carries on, and because you have to protect for the future once COVID-19 somehow starts to reduce a little bit.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? I mean, it's been. I can imagine that, especially in the mobility industry, it's been crazy. But before going into detail in that, which is going to be, I think, very insightful and interesting, we have to do the kitchen stuff first.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are you preparing? Because I know you have a great cook at home.
Yes, we do.
You
It's
usually
not
don't do.
me, in all fairness.
Well,
So, yes.
yes.
So I had to, So in fairness, I had to call a helpline to give me some creative stuff on what to do tonight, and obviously taking the rule into account of 5 ingredients, that makes it slightly more difficult. But finally, we managed to it. So it's call it a Southern Eastern Mediterranean Nachspeise dessert. So the ingredients are apples, walnuts,
Nice.
a little bit of honey, sorry,
Uh-huh.
a bit of zimt,
Cinnamon. Yeah.
cinnamon, and to top it up, a little bit of sweet wine. In this case, I chose a port wine that was at home. And so
Excellent.
the idea is just to mix and match everything, let it rest for about half an hour, and then we're good to go to have a dessert.
Nice.
Thank
Excellent. And I'm doing something more savory. I'm going to be using some celery.
Very healthy.
Yes, some yogurt, a little bit of
Oh,
a mayonnaise, and some walnuts. And
ah,
Actually, this is a great starter. You can use it, as a starter, as a cold starter, and you can spread it on bread. It's Turkish, so it's very, very good thing to begin with. So let's go back to the serious talk. So, I remember we had so many possibilities, opportunities to chat a little bit about the future of mobility, you and I, in our more intimate setting in private. But let's talk about more publicly. I know that you can't go into lots of detail, but how do you see actually the future of mobility when you think about just the last 6 weeks, 5 weeks, what happened to the world? Uh, do we actually really need to be mobile as much as we think we need it?
Very, very interesting question. So I have to say, for a large company I'm working with, having to switch from one day to the next from working at home, all of us collectively, I have to admit, I never thought it was going to run as smooth actually as it did. Of course, there are hiccups and technical problems, but all in all, it worked very, very well. There is one specific domain, and I read a story about that even happens with tech companies or real tech companies like Apple, which is the real product design. So when you have drawing, sketching, or making even in clay as we do new models, that is going to be a challenge, and you need to have physical get-togetherings, to be able to see the future product in real dimensions, because we make the clay models in a one-to-one scale. But also the bigger problem there lies into ensuring that data protection is ensured, because trouble now obviously is hacking, and when we do design reviews on physical properties, this is in a very secured and closed IT systematic where it's not connected to any outside world. Yeah. So that we haven't overcome yet, and we still will need to do physical meetings. Yeah. Whether this is going to be permanent or not is a big open question. Obviously, the manufacturing bit of our industry is completely in shatters right now. And the reason for that, A, is the social distancing, but B, also because all the dealerships are closed. So if you think about our industry, which is, it's just burning cash, because we literally don't sell almost any vehicle, and that doesn't just go for us, it goes for the whole industry, because in almost all of the countries, the dealerships are considered to be a store and hence have to be closing. So that is a very, very specific part of our industry. And if you don't sell a vehicle, then there's no sense producing them and putting them on stocks and on lots.
So the lockdown, you said, just came for Ford a week ago, or for this week. And for other companies, I think Volkswagen already closed some of the production in Europe, in I think Eastern Europe, a couple of weeks ago already. And so if, I mean, do we, my first question is actually, are we not in any ways producing more than we actually need?
The car industry, so first to make it correct, so Ford has also, so I've been working from home for 4 weeks. This specific week was something that was company specific, where they decided that even offices and any development work would be shut down. But our factories are also closed, I think, relatively in the same time frame as all the others.
Yeah.
So overcapacity has always been one of the biggest problems in the car industry, and that's why you always see very big discounts being hung around on vehicles, simply because there is I would say a chronicle overcapacity in the automotive industry, which has many different reasons. Obviously, in a situation like this one, this overcapacity is being exposed even more. And how that will be impacted once the crisis is over is difficult to judge right now. But it is clear that because you're burning so much cash right now and you're not producing anything, it will be there will be some consequences in different companies on the amount of installed capacity for the future. That obviously goes along now with the fact that you see more and more companies transitioning to electrified vehicles. And you see by the electrification of the vehicle, because it is a much easier concept. It's a battery and an electromotor, basically. So that reduces the amount of needed workforce to produce these components and to assemble the vehicles by default. So that phase combination with COVID now makes it an even more volatile business to work in.
That's true. On the other hand, I mean, if one would just go ahead and think about it, this could be a turning point in understanding and changing the future of mobility industries, becoming more lean. Of course, I mean, all of this has a lot of implications. So what do you see as the biggest challenge in this transition process? Is it letting go of so many people, which of course has a lot of consequences on the societal level, socio-economic level, but on the other hand, trying to artificially keep that workforce, of course, has other implications. So this is like, how would you go about this chicken and egg problem?
Well, it's a very challenging question, but the right one. So
it's exactly one of those questions you discuss while we're preparing dessert.
absolutely. And so my mixture is ready. So I'm now waiting.
Yes, I grated the celery. So
very good. So let me try and tackle it from a different angle. So as you know, I've never been the biggest fan of Elon Musk or his company Tesla in the sense of idolizing him. But when you take the emotional point of view away from it and you actually analyze or analytically look at the product that he developed, I would say the electrification is something that he used handily because obviously he also anticipated on the legislation, and that legislation on reducing the CO2 tailpipe emissions is already since a long time in there. And right now, unless you have hydrogen vehicles, there's no other solution than to electrify them. But the real innovative thing that he actually did is that he basically made a car working the same way as your iPhone or your iPad or your laptop. Namely, it's got one gigantic processor in it. If you look at the way classical vehicles or the way the vehicles up till now have been designed, is they're carrying, I don't know, the best part of 30 to 40 different modules in it, because for everything, every subcomponent of a vehicle, there was a different module that was needed to steer that thing. And obviously the critical thing about this is combining all these communication stuff. If you then go a step further and say, well, okay, one of the things that Apple got so good is because they keep sending you updates over the air. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to go to a store to repair it or to get an upgrade. You just get it through the net. And in order to deliver that capacity into the vehicle world, you need to get to a concept which is basically having one big processor that you can give all the updates through in once. And I think for me, that is the biggest innovative step that Musk did. And I think that is a step now that many companies are going to start pursuing, because the biggest challenge when you look at over-the-air updates is, of course, cybersecurity. Because the last thing that you want to do is to get hacked by someone or some group or country or God knows who will be threatening you and say, well, if you don't pay us X amount of millions of dollars, at best case, your vehicles will not drive. In worst case, we're going to get accidents for you, which has a lot of consequences.
Yeah.
So one challenge. If you look at the employment challenge, I think it probably comes to a point where you have to naturally start phasing out a number of headcount that you've got, simply because due to the electrification, you need less people. The second thing is, where does the whole autonomous driving go and lead to? Because once you have autonomous driving vehicles, the idea behind that business model is obviously that you're not going to own any longer a vehicle. There's another aspect that you put on top of that, and obviously that is the whole public transport scene. So if you think about bigger cities, then I would say it is definitely possible to live without a car for day-to-day needs. And there are other business models that have not been successful yet, and that maybe that there is a time that will come relatively soon that the Ubers, Lyfts, or car sharing platforms start becoming viable once that you have a better control over cost and what you want to charge to your customers that are using it. Because at the end of the day, it's an economical model as well that has to work.
But I mean, when we think about this transition process, lots of people out there, I don't know how well informed those discussions are actually taking place outside, because we had a phase where electrified cars were like the new god in the mobility scene. Then there are the counterparts, or counter argumentations, like the ones you mentioned, but also, how do you get the cobalt? How do you get the, particularly important metals to go into the battery, which has other implications, of course, in terms of environment. But also employment. But in all of this discussion, people also talk about, yes, we might have to let a lot of people go, but on the other hand, we need even more people to do this, and that job. So how do you see that actually? Are we, at the end of the day, are we really going to get lean in terms of production, mobility, the conveyor belt? Or is it just like a, I don't know, a fairy tale? And it's because, I mean, obviously we're heading towards a hyper efficiency type of economy. So it looks like you need less people to do more jobs. So what do you think about this?
Well, so as I already stated, so from a assembly and production point of view, you're definitely going to need less people simply because of the technology that is going to be used. Excuse me. On the development side, however, as I mentioned, when you go to cybersecurity over-the-air updates and creating one big module that is ensuring that your vehicle drives, brakes, steers, and etc., the job move definitely is going to be from the pure manufacturing side, but is steering towards the development side of software and protecting the software from cybersecurity. And there you see definitely a race in employment coming. So you need a different group of people, a different set of education, but it doesn't mean that you need to completely get rid of the hand workers, the craftspeople that put together. Because one of the things that Tesla actually learned was that they automated their factories. And when you automate your factories, at one point in time, you get to certain breakdowns, and you then need people to repair the breakdowns. But even then, you're going to lose productivity. So there is a fine balance there between automation and productivity. And I think now that Tesla has understood that, you actually also see their volume numbers starting to ramp up. Obviously, they've got the Model 3 out, which is a cheaper variant of their product that is available and appealing to more people. But the key trick with them was to find the balance in automation and employment there. But if you look at the back office with Tesla and now with all the regular known OEMs, the big growth in employment comes in the software development and cybersecurity development. That is clearly the path forward in terms of getting people on board.
That's very interesting. I'm just looking at the Slido right now. By the way, people out there, we have Slido if you want to ask, all sorts of questions about your Ford or about, car industry in general. Stefan is your man. So go grab your phones and ask questions on slide.do. Our event code is 18306. You can see it at the bottom of our screen. And I see a question here. Very interesting. Can you speculate about business ideas that an automotive company like Ford could pivot into or add into their portfolio? So it's like, can you give us all your secrets?
Unfortunately, but I think it's no secret to say that one of the very big strengths of Ford worldwide is its commercial vehicle business. So we're a leader in that segment up to 3.5 tons with various different products. And if you think about companies that are needing this type of vehicle, so you're talking about parcel service deliveries, you're talking about the telecom business, etc. They want productivity because for them this product is their investment and it needs to make money and it needs to be on the road. So what you see, and I cannot unfortunately go into the specifics because that would be revealing company secrets, which I'm not allowed to do. I would like to start the work on Tuesday. You see that we are having a whole back office that is working very heavily and fast on mobility solutions, whether it is working specifically with companies to give them telematic information, whether it is working together with cities. Again, it's no secret we're working very closely with the City of London, where there are things like the last mile delivery or the parking problems, and our offices are working very closely with them and with many different startups to develop innovative solutions that we can offer to our global customers so that the efficiency and the usability of their fleet can be increased. And that is definitely a pocket of innovation, I would say, within the car industry.
Why has the car industry been sleeping for such a long time? Until someone like Elon Musk came in to stir the whole business, it looked like, everything was just going fine on its own and there was no disruption. And I remember when we spoke about the different types of engines once, you said, it's actually really weird that there has not been a true innovation since the combustion engine was invented and being constantly improved, but it's all kind of incremental and nothing really quantum leap.
Yeah, and it's a very I mean the car business and Ford is one. We are existing for 117 years. Some of the others are also centenary, so it's an old industry, an industry that has thrived for many decades and has made a lot of money and has made a lot of employment for a lot of people. So without going again into specifics, you see in many different countries a very close link between governments, investments, employment, car industry. So disrupting that model would disrupt a significant part of the economy. If you think back in the old days of Ford in Belgium, at the point in time when I started in the company, there were 12,000 people working in one single factory. That is like a mini city. Yeah. The car industry in those days in Belgium was basically good for several percentage points of GDP. Yeah. So if you start looking at those macro factors, then it becomes relatively evident why nothing could happen. So as I said, Musk is big thing for me, and I think many people will join me in that. It's not so much the electrification that he's got. It was clear that if he needed to make a car, and that's what I said, the key thing is a combustion engine, and you don't just have that knowledge available over a very short period of time. So electrification was a logical thing for him to do. The key invention was how to create one big processor that can work and can steer a car with all its different functions. And that's where he made, to my point of view, a quantum leap. The other thing, of course, is also, which I wrote in one of the manifests that we did together in Sonophilia, is you also have to look at the government and the regulatory offices. So what you see was that the government on a, let's take a European level to begin with, because that's the one that I know the best. Emission standards were usually valid for 5 years because it was through a lot of lobby work, obviously, that you needed to find this balance, and the balance was a 5-year plan that gave the industry time to have a significant investment and variable costs put into the product, but also be able then to make benefit of it. And that period has basically stopped in the last 3-4 years, and I've witnessed it basically on a daily basis, that you have changes in the legislation at a rate of almost one coming into effect every year. And that is a disruption that the car industry hasn't been used to and needs to get adapted to, rightly or wrongly. Now, let's not go into my opinion about the effectiveness of the CO2 emissions, because that's a totally, we could use up another hour.
I know.
But that has been, I would say there are different ways to look at it, and yes, Musk has been the one who, with his model, who steered up the whole joint, and secondly, the whole thing about emissions, both the CO2 emissions, but also the NOx, the finite particle emissions. That legislation is basically now driving the whole industry to go into a much more fast response mode than what it used to be. And in an old institution, obviously, it is not as easy because you've got a legacy to you, and if something goes wrong, then you've got hundreds of millions of cars out there that need to be protected by warranty measures, etc. And Musk doesn't have that legacy behind him because he's a relatively new company. So that, I wouldn't say is the key reason why he could be, but it definitely has helped him because he doesn't have to look back to. I mean, he just crossed 1 million vehicles quite recently, which is still a very big achievement.
Absolutely.
If you look at anybody else, it's totally different matter on what is happening.
But I mean, at the end of the day, he kind of managed to steer up the whole business. Also, of course, with this really well and clever marketing behind how he staged everything. I mean, one of course needs to kind of acknowledge how awesome his work has been. On the other hand, there are other models that could be, if not even more effective in terms of CO2 emissions and things like that. And then I remember you mentioning hydrogen cars. So what do you think about that, and why are we not following on? Because you hear all sorts of different speculations, all sorts of so-called experts tell you that the hydrogen car is actually even more CO2 unfriendly than the battery versus the combustion engine. So can you just give us a little, demystify? So because you're an engineer and you're right in that business, so are you looking into all those possibilities as well?
Definitely. I mean, there are several countries these days which I would say not pioneer, but beginning to do mass production of hydrogen cars, and this is mainly happening in Japan and Korea. Now, the thing with that is I mean, technically, it's a perfectly viable option to propose a vehicle. However, if you look at the distribution network of the source of energy that you use, in this case, the hydrogen, then you will see that the number of distribution points of hydrogen are even significantly behind those of electrification stations. So, and that is the biggest hurdle, and also my personal criticism to the Commission is that I'm perfectly okay to go with electrified vehicles, and there are different solutions for different user cases. However, the big thing is it needs to be not just the car industry, but you need to have a bigger view from a society point of view as how to ensure that the electricity is available. And I heard quite a few examples about Norway, who's as a country has been very innovative in that, because they're now building houses where there is by default electricity charging stations available, and they are combining that also with renting out cars, electrified cars, of course, that you can either rent on a daily basis or on a per kilometer basis or whatever. So my view is it needs to be a whole societal view on it. It can't just be give it to the car industry to solve it. No, they have to be part of it, but you need to look at it as a wider thing. If you look at Germany, for instance, the government and everybody has been very much insistent on the automotive industry not doing their thing. And obviously the Volkswagen scandal oh, by the way, it's called not the VW scandal, it's called the diesel scandal. So it's a very good communication work done by other people.
Wow, yeah, actually that's true. I'm just realizing that.
So, and if you think about, so the government in due course following the EU government is insisting that car companies have to do more. But if you then look at what is being done on the distribution side to provide the electricity in very, very many points to the people, then you see that nothing happens. So the car industry then made a joint venture to well, not invent, but to create and distribute high charging points. So again, that's where I say it has to be much more of a integrated effort between governments, energy providers, car industries, in order to have a holistic view on how to solve and the emissions part as well as the mobility part.
But someone needs to drive it. Someone needs to be in the driver's seat. Like, again, thinking back about the electrified model, someone just did it. Everybody was like, wow, this is happening right now. I mean, it's interesting actually that the electrified models were also already in use even before they were so big in the US through Elon Musk. In Japan and South Korea, we know the Toyota hybrids were already quite popular on the streets before Tesla. So it looks like they're now again leading the way into the hydrogen model. But obviously someone needs to come in and needs to have an extremely well done marketing effort around all of this, so to kind of excite the public like Mr. Musk did.
Absolutely, because as you can see with his share price, obviously until COVID, he managed to persuade the stock markets and raise money, because let's not forget, making or producing and developing a new car is a very highly capital and heavy invested thing. If on top of that you want to make a distribution network of either electricity or hydrogen, then there is another significant step of investment money involved on top of that. And you need to have somebody with who dares to take that risk, who has a very good selling and marketing story to do that. Because if it goes wrong, then the investment losses are obviously significant, right? So we shouldn't forget. The other downside, if I make, is not that I want to bash on Mr. Musk and his thing, but the interesting that went relatively unnoticed in public media is that at the beginning of the year, and I think I was one of those few who said that it was going to happen. I didn't realize it was going to happen so much. Is the price of his charge went up by a multifold to the point where he is charging you now 3 to 4 times more on electricity than you pay for your household. That's another thing that is playing in that whole thing. So if you take the simple example of somebody driving 20,000 kilometers a year on diesel or petrol, doesn't really make a difference. Then that person will pay about €1,000 a year to the government in form of taxes on your petrol or your diesel. If you take the same amount of mileage in pure electricity, then that bill to the government drops to about €300. So all of a sudden, you've got a €700 gap. If you multiply that by over 1 million users, which is relatively easy in Germany, then all of a sudden you have a gigantic hole in the governmental income. So again, one of the things that people don't pay attention to, because it is one of those many elements that in my view has to be worked on in a coalition effort between industry, governments, etc. Because the last thing that you want to do is to put everybody on electrified vehicles, and then all of a sudden you're going to raise the prices on electricity or the taxes on electricity because the government will receive less money. And that obviously defeats the whole idea of making people to go electrical driving. So it's a very complicated and complex.
It is quite complicated, but obviously the answer is also not just to stay as we are. So where do you see the light at the end of the tunnel?
I think the light at the end of the tunnel has to come from, I would say, a few brave people in the higher parliaments, whether it's on a national and specifically on a European level, that work in an open mind together with the consumed or the global industry in Europe to come up with this concept of how do you tackle it, that you have A, the transition to go into the electrified world, but B, ensure the distribution, ensure that the calculations you made people to do when they decided to go over from one type of vehicle to the next don't get adverse, because all of a sudden you start raising taxes. And that has to be a holistic view, and that will take, in my opinion, it will take time to get all the minds and noses pointed in the same direction, and then you need probably several years to make that happen. Otherwise, you come to the point where you have such a high demand on cobalt batteries and lithium that you're just gonna make spiking prices for that commodity, and that again defeats the purpose of making mass production on those vehicles, right? So it's a industry with a lot of history, and it's a tanker that you need to carefully steer. If you want to steer it too brusque, yes, you can do that, but it will.
Yeah, but I mean, then suddenly things happen like the Corona crisis that shows billions of people that mobility does not necessarily have to be perceived as a right, but more like as a privilege, as it used to be like 30, 40 years ago. Not everybody traveled. Travel was something special, especially air travel was something, not a mass production. People used to smoke in airplanes, which was horrible. I'm not saying that we should go back to prehistoric situation, but all of this crisis kind of showed us, someone like myself, who was just traveling all over the place to meet people. Of course, I mean, nothing is like meeting in analog, which is beautiful. But on the other hand, you can keep your relationships, you can keep your business, you can think about how to put your business into the digital realm, and everything just runs smoothly. Um, um, so then you start asking yourself, do I really have to be everywhere, or do I just sit down and choose more wisely when to travel, where to travel?
Oh yeah, and I think that is that is very correct analysis, and I'm almost 100% sure that when offices start to open back up and the measures are going to be reduced, that companies, and not just mine, but all different companies will start to think differently about how they can have an effective working from home environment. Because it unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it has proven now that with a crisis it can work. And I would say before this crisis, I was personally not a big friend or favor of working from home for various reasons, because I'm very much relying on personal contact and going to people's desk and talking to them and making relationships work like this. Um, it now has proven to me that even in this condition, I can still be effective in my work and developing my new products in a virtual world with virtual meetings nonstop, looking at approval papers, getting inputs from all sorts of places, and it seems to be working. Probably it won't be perfect in the beginning, but it definitely is a model that I'm sure many CEOs and executive boards will start thinking about what lessons they can learn from this crisis and how they can become more leaner and more effective in their communication and working spaces and environments. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely really very interesting, because same thing, with our kids. Since they're now mostly, online schooled, or they have Zoom calls with their friends as well, you start questioning this concept of uh, being have to go to a place to work. It doesn't need to necessarily be an extra building. And then when you spin this through the end, um, you would reduce so many things that are just there unnecessarily, maybe partly, and just make other things that are more valuable, stick out even more. So I think I will be pondering on this. Maybe I should invite someone from urban planning or something like that. That would be a very interesting
Oh
idea
yeah.
to talk
You
about.
talk about. I
So
think one idea for a next entrepreneur's kitchen would be to talk about education, because I mean, just today our youngest daughter received her new karate belt via a Zoom call with her karate teacher, who was showing the moves that she had to do, and she's repeating them with a Zoom conference, and he then sent her belt out via the post. So uh, probably not the best way to
that's
get to a
wow.
black thing in karate, but at least it is working, and I very much appreciate the teacher for his entrepreneurial skill and using technology to keep on doing a
Absolutely.
classical sport with kids.
Yeah, just
So
let's not hope that she kind of needs a counterpart at some point and starts.
it will be me, I'm sure about that. So.
Yeah, I'm going to have to talk to Catherine about this. There is another question at Slido, and we're nearing the end, so we have to start cracking jokes. But before before we do that, what is, in your opinion, the biggest unsolved problem in mobility? Ooh.
Very good question.
I have an answer actually to this question.
So I have to go first, right?
No, I'm just going to kid. It's the people.
Yeah. Well, that is definitely one thing. If you look at it from a pure technical side, I would say the biggest hurdle right now is level 4 autonomous cars. Something that we were speaking about, I would say less than a year or a year and a half ago, as the next thing that would happen definitely in 2021 is the one thing where I would say from an insider point of view, it will take longer to come up with a concept and a system that works. And there are many, many different technical and physical reasons behind that. But I think to your point, if you look at it, yes, people have become used to buying cars and having 2, 3 cars or multiple cars in a household, and just this notion of owning a car is something that I'm sure will disappear or at least reduce over the certain periods of time, because we're seeing it in big cities happening. If you live obviously in a more rural countryside, then you obviously need either a very reliable high frequency public transport, or you need a car yourself that you own, rent, whatever. But purely from a technological point of view, autonomous level 4 I see as the biggest challenge right now, A, from a technical side, and B, to make a business model out of it that is going to make sense at the end. And that is something that many companies are now struggling with significantly.
Yeah.
And maybe that is an opportunity to get some technological breakthroughs, as in smaller batteries with higher capacity, with much longer lifetime, LiDAR sensors that are going to consume much less energy.
No flying cars in near future?
Probably not. I think it would create a bit of a mess up in the air that we might not want to see happening.
Well, I agree. That looks like a very dystopian future. Although in science fictions they fly like really smoothly on their lanes, and everything looks so perfect, very sterile. So, how's your food doing?
It has been zipping here for long, so I have to now make my own.
Is it good? Excellent. So this is mine. Look, I beautifully decorated it. I even took a picture this time because people were asking. What is your joke?
Second. So, as you might know, I'm not the best person to invent or say jokes, but never mind. I listened to you, and I was listening to the radio today. Unfortunately, I have to say it in German because the clue will be much better in German, but we'll translate it immediately. So, do you know why a mouse never drinks alcohol? Warum trinkt eine Maus niemals Alkohol? Weil sie danach einen Kater bekommt.
Oh!
I'm sorry for the public. It has to be in German. English translation doesn't work out so much.
It doesn't make sense. No, Germans call a if you get a sore muscle and you get like lots of drinks, alcohol, the aftermath of it is called a kata, which translates as a cat, as a male cat. So that's what's okay. I have an animal joke too.
Oh, okay. I'm happy to read. Go on.
Why did the man call his dogs Timex and Rolex?
No idea.
Because they were watchdogs. See, don't die.
No.
Yeah. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I think this was one of the really insightful conversations I had. It's been an amazing week thus far. We had really deep dive into topics in robotics and now in automotives, and I find it quite interesting to actually hear about these things from people who are not necessarily, just trying to combat for one or the other opinion. So who have a different variety of, who have seen a different variety of options and who can actually really weigh between those different options. I want to thank you once again for joining me tonight. You stay on the line while I say goodnight to our guests, and you just get ready for the after show party.
Well, thank you very much. It is an honor to be invited, as I don't consider myself to be an entrepreneur. When I watched some of the previous guests who were there, they are obviously real entrepreneurs with their own companies, etc. But thank you very much.
You definitely have the entrepreneurial spirit, Stefan. Thank you. So, guys, so tune in for tomorrow's talk. Tomorrow, Friday, the end of the week, we're going to have another very interesting guest here. He's Bart De Witte. He's going to be talking about AI and open source data in health. And it's, again, he is right now hacking the corona crisis. He is one of those brilliant minds working on this issue. And I'm truly looking forward to the end of the week with him. And I want to thank you for tuning in for tonight's talk. I'm hoping that you had some valuable insights. I want to apologize for my jokes. So this time we didn't get the streaming broken, but I almost killed my guest. So, thank you. Join me tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to seeing you again, and have a great Thursday night. Bye-bye.